stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Welcome to the September 28, 2022 Planning Board meeting. First on the agenda is Kiwi Country Day School, 825 Union Valley Road. I don't know, Mike and Rich aren't present tonight.
So I'm pitch hitting for everybody. So at the last meeting, the primary issue with the board was what those yurt structures were used for. So
Microphone, please.
Mike's not here to push my button. Sorry. Clarifying what the new structures were to be used for. And as you remember, part of the other conversation was what's changed on the site. So Adam submitted clarification with that. The plans you see now, there are notes around the perimeter of the plan that speak to the changes to the drawing. Prior to you executing this, Mr. Chairman, those notes probably should be reflected by physically taking out or removing those things on the plan so the note is no longer necessary. Mike indicated one additional issue. Since this property now includes the single-family residence adjacent, it's now been merged into the camp. The expansion of this use requires a use variance on that single-family residential property. So this application requires the use variance, in Mike's opinion. Other than that, Adam will explain to you how the yurts are going to be used. I think they're programming, and other than cleaning up the plan, that's where we stand. We're in good shape. Rich has no other further comments, and I think the applicant has also met with both Rich and Mike to deal with some of these issues independently.
So Pat, as the board remembers, I believe, is in 2015, Kiwi was in front of us. So what you're saying is we want to get the 2015 changes, what were implemented, what weren't, the 2022 proposed changes, and just clean it up into one document. So the final document we have is all-inclusive.
And the document there, the notes clarify it. I'd rather see the picture rather than the notes.
Yeah.
So the notes are no longer necessary.
Just one question I have, the yurts, they're not going to be for any overnight activities, correct?
No, these are just for, they're for programming during the day, during camp hours. They're not for any type of residential or overnight use. Again, we, and Pat touched on it, we've done a few things since we were here last. We met with Mike, went over the uses of all the structures on the site. It's all been labeled, and I think it's been clarified. Happy to clarify anything else if the board or the consultants feel it's necessary, but I think it's pretty clear at this point. We also spoke about the use of the yurts, again, strictly for programming uses during the day, during the camp hours, which are really just during the summer. In addition to that, we provided the call-outs, and I'll work with Pat in terms of what he wants to see specifically done with the plan in lieu of the call-outs that we've added. We've labeled a few things. I'm happy to run through the changes if you'd like, but they're all there kind of clearly labeled, as you can see. And additionally, we've also provided additional detail with regard to the proposed gate at 31 Blossom and the yurts. So you can see this is actually directly from the manufacturer that the applicant intends to purchase the yurts from. So you can get a sense of what those look like. And again, like we talked about last time, these are essentially big tents that they'll be conducting this programming in. The one item that I did discuss with Mike, I did have a conversation with Rich as well, just over the phone, but we did meet with Mike in person. We spoke yesterday, the day before, about the use issue. Just want to point out, we did go back through, Mike asked us to do a little research and go back and see what variances were previously provided. There was a use variance for the residential, for the director's residence use on the site. We're simply relocating it. And when Mike is back from vacation, I'm happy to go over that with him and, get his final interpretation of what needs to be done, and then the applicant will be happy. We'll go over the options with the applicant, and then we'll do whatever needs to be done.
Do you believe you might not need the use variance? Is that your contention?
I think ultimately it's probably a question that Mike will have to make an interpretation on, and so we're just hoping the board will have us back in a couple of weeks. In the interim, we'll be able to get with Mike on that, get a final determination of what he thinks is the appropriate course or the options for, the appropriate courses. We'll make a determination with the applicant, and then we'll move forward with whichever direction we need to go forward with.
Questions from the board?
With regard to the yurts, I believe there was a question last time. Are those going to get taken down in the fall or after the summer season?
They may or they may not. They're not really going to be used during the winter. And when I spoke with the applicant, his response was, it more than anything will come down to the manufacturer's recommendation. If snow and winter exposure is not going to be good for them, then they're going to take them down. But they don't have a set determination whether they're going to. They'd prefer not to be locked into one way or the other. They may well take them down, like I said, per manufacturer specification. But that they'd prefer to leave open-ended. But again, there's no use, in the winter. It's really just, again,
How do they
daytime
anchor?
during camp season.
How are they anchored?
How are they what?
How are they anchored? Are they bolted down to a slab that's going to be poured?
That
What's
no,
the
it's
detail?
it's not a slab. I think there's a small deck platform, the at grade deck platform, and the yurt is attached to that.
How many of them are there again?
We're proposing 4 of them.
4.
So
Yeah.
just to follow up on Anthony's question, you would build a wooden platform and then mount these to the wooden platform?
That's why I'm not sure, and I'll get back to you on whether the platform comes as part of the assembly with the yurt kit, essentially, that they purchase, or if the deck, the small, at grade deck is built, and then the yurt kit is attached to that, and I can get you, that answer.
I'd like that a little
Yeah.
bit more detail, because where I'm going with this is in the event of a windstorm, or a severe storm with high winds, I can see that.
Yeah,
being
and I'm sure there's a contingency for wind, and and I think it's more than anything, it's just the sheer weight of the thing. But I'll look into
Make that
that.
part of your final package?
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think it's a benefit to have a fixed base that's there permanently. So if they are seasonal, you'd put them back in the same spot every year.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would definitely be part of the plan. Would be, if they were taken down, it would be the structure itself, and the base would remain in place.
Questions from the board? Do we have a motion to deny to the ZBA?
So Adam's asking to clarify before you do that.
Yeah, I think maybe the best route, just so that we have a final interpretation. Like I spoke with Mike before he went away. We did look into it. Like I said, we discovered this variance that had previously been provided. And we'd like to just have one more discussion with Mike, get final clarification on that, come back in a couple of weeks if it's okay with the board, and then go whichever route we need to go.
And just again, on Anthony's point, bring the specifications for the...
Yes.
And the base, too, so we can see.
All right, we'll see you in a few weeks out.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is ARC Mid-Hudson, 575 Drewville Road, amended site plan. I believe there was quite a few comments on this.
So we all had comments on this, Mr. Chairman. Essentially, they are proposing expanded parking lot behind the existing building. This is above and beyond what the parking requirement is for the site. So issue number 1 is why the additional parking? Is the site being used more intensively? What's going on? Why the need for the additional parking? The second element with respect to the parking area is generally well-designed. It's in the right spot. They have one issue that's a zoning compliance issue, which is our code allows for, it requires 20 by 10-foot parking spaces. You can have an 18-foot parking space if there's a 2-foot overhang, a parking bumper and a 2-foot overhang. The way it's designed, The 2-foot overhang would be in an area that's a new sidewalk, so you can't overlap.
Defeats the purpose, right?
That defeats the purpose. So I think you have room to move the sidewalk and gain the 2 feet. Otherwise, if you can't make it, that's a variance issue. It's not a discretionary issue. The front of the parking lot, if you notice, the central parking bay has a landscape strip between the parking spaces. There is no similar full landscape strip in the back. Because this is extra parking, we'd like them to do a good job of the parking lot. So if you could look at them to see if you can provide a landscape strip between those parking bays, add some additional landscaping, cool off the parking lot, all that good stuff. It's starting to get tight. I don't know if you can fit it in there, but if you take a look at that. Mike noted the issue with respect to the parking space size and a stormwater plan. You didn't submit a stormwater plan with this. It's now new impervious surface. We'll need to see a stormwater plan with this. There are some new light fixtures that are proposed in the back, pole-mounted light fixtures. We need to see illumination levels to the property line, details like that. There is new landscaping, as you can see, which is fine. Generally, not significant issues. The primary issue, what's changing that requires the parking on the site.
Thank you. Board comments? Adam, I have a couple.
Sure.
I think we'd like to hear the why that Pat mentioned.
Yep.
As you're doing that also, what about electric car charging stations? If you add them 50 some odd, is that planned at all? And before I turn over, you can answer all these questions. When I pulled in there, I pulled into the right, and it came around, and you had to go around the left side of the building if you're looking at it to get to the back. I'm not sure how a fire truck would get back there like that. And I think somewhere either Pat or
That's
Rich or
one of
Mike.
Rich's comments.
Okay.
Was approval by the fire,
Good traffic flow, okay.
Carmel Fire Department. Yeah.
So those are some questions I had before you give us the introduction and what, if you can include those in your response.
Sure, yeah, I'll try and hit all the points and just give a quick summary. So, again, Adam Feiberg, Inside Engineering Surveying, Landscape Architecture, PC, here representing ARC Mid-Hudson. So this amended site plan, it's really a two-pronged, it's two-pronged in nature. As Pat mentioned, we're seeking to add 51 parking spaces to this facility, 575 Drewville Road.
Can you speak better into the microphone?
Yes.
That much better. Thank you.
As the board may be aware, ARC is an organization that provides support and day services for people with disabilities, and they offer transportation services as part of their program. So they're seeking to keep more of their fleet at 575 Drewville Road, as well as to provide a little more parking for visitors and employees. But the primary motivation for the additional parking space is to be able to store more of their vehicles that they use for transportation. They're a large organization, kind of a statewide organization. They have a lot of vehicles. They have a lot of locations in the area, and they're looking to be able to keep more of those vehicles at this location. And that's really the primary impetus for the first prong of the project. And it's important to Pat's point to note that there are no proposed changes to the facility use in terms of the use itself or the intensity of use. And there's no proposed change to the buildings themselves. In addition to the additional parking spaces, we're looking at the improvements shown at the front of the building, which are really just to improve accessibility to the facility and meet current accessibility standards. So that's what's shown at the front of the building, and it includes the reconfiguration, regrading of some of the parking, sidewalks, and the proposed ramps that you see there. So given the nature of the work that they do, ARC is dedicated to providing a fully accessible facility. Craig, Mr. Chairman, with regard to your couple of questions, we are open to providing EV charging stations. Again, these additional spaces are really to serve existing fleet vehicles. We're not increasing the intensity of the use. We're going to have a whole bunch of new people coming there and with electric vehicles looking to charge them. This is really, it's the van and, the other types of vehicles that they already possess and are planning to keep there. If it's an important, issue beyond the practicality of that they probably don't need them, then I'm sure it's something that consider.
Are you doing any work in the front parking lot as part of this?
Yeah, so the limit of the work in the front is essentially the end of the existing parking spaces against the buildings here. So I'll just draw right on here. Essentially, that's the edge of the work. Coming to your question about the fire truck accessibility. Let me show you the existing conditions plan. This driveway here is currently not to this width. So another piece of this is that's being widened to improve circulation and to improve the ability for vehicles to move back there. If I can just get this sheet to fold up. So you can see here how narrow this is here.
Yeah.
There's an existing retaining wall there. If you drove back there, you would have seen it's only something, I think it's something in the neighborhood of 16 feet wide. So we're widening that to the 24 in this plan. And we're happy to also provide a maneuvering plan and show, through our software, we can show a vehicle
I think Rich asked for a traffic
traversing the site. So I think I touched on those two items. Couple of points for Pat. The 18-foot spaces. Would you recommend that we switch out the sidewalk that goes right to the curb and provide a 2-foot lawn strip, or could we just have a wider sidewalk and then 2 feet, taken away from 5, still leaves 3 feet clear?
So in the case of this use, any portion of a sidewalk is probably going to be used. It would be confusing. I think we'd want to have the discrete sidewalk and the discrete overhang,
Sure.
knowing that the likelihood that handicapped people will be using the site is pretty high. So let's not confuse things, or let's not invite a long-fronted car to be impinging on the sidewalk.
Sure. And then the other side.
And by
of
the
that-
way, the alternative is provide a 20-foot space.
Right, understood. And the other side of that coin is widening things to provide landscaping, which are two things that are kind of working in opposite directions.
Yep.
But we'll look at it and see what's possible.
Board members, questions?
So, I'm somewhat familiar with ARC. A lot of the vehicles that I'm aware of are typically the vans and the smaller buses. Is that what they're really looking to park in the back there?
Yeah, my understanding from the applicant is that's the primary rationale for, the primary motivation for this is that they want to keep more of those, the vans and those types of vehicles at this facility.
Right, so what my thought is, and it goes along with what Pat was saying, so now you're talking about vehicles that are on average longer than cars. So if we have an 18-foot parking spot, could
No, it's
you try to
understood.
look at it and see if you can get to the 20?
Yeah, we'll definitely give it a look, and we'll see if we can get it to 20, and yeah, your point is well taken.
I realize we're asking you to do a lot with putting a strip in and go to 20, and, I get it, but it
No,
just
but
seems
we're
to be a
happy
little bit
we're happy to
safer.
study it, yeah, we'll take a look.
Since we're asking that, and you are doing some work in the front, right? You just mentioned by that red line, you were doing some work. Since
Right,
you're
yeah, I
doing it, I know the towns, I've been to meetings at the town, I know the town wants to start putting some EV stations in. I'm not saying you're gonna need to go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to it,
Sure.
but I think you should try to put in 1 or 2 for visitors. We have to start somewhere in the town. And, Joe, you have any, we've talked about chargers in town, and we need to start the infrastructure somewhere.
It's funny, I just asked Pat, I know our code doesn't have a provision.
Yeah.
But yet, right. But obviously, there is a trend towards that in public and municipal parking, which is going to extend to private facilities as well, in my opinion. So it's certainly something that the board could consider. But at the same time, you have to balance that against the rights of the property owner who does not want to have a 24/7 charging station, especially in the rear of the property there, where it's not visible from Drewville.
I'm suggesting the front. I'm suggesting the front, so with your electric car that you do have, when you pull up there to visit.
Do I have to disclose that?
So anyway, please
Yeah,
look into it.
we'll
It's not
take
a
a-
mandate, but I think it's an improvement to the facilities. I think when facilities come in front of us, we should request it.
Absolutely.
In this
Agreed.
document that we are all reviewing here, it does talk about charging stations.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would say, just on that point, if they ever upgrade the vehicles and you buy an electric vehicle, you've already got the station at least for one.
Sure.
I don't know if you have a bigger one, smaller one,
Yeah.
but at least the option is there, so
Yeah,
it might be worthwhile.
and I haven't discussed that particular topic with the applicant. I will. And, the only other consideration that I think I'd have to look at is just, again, getting back to the length of the spaces and the sidewalk and how much room we actually have to provide something, but we'll definitely give it a look, and we'll talk to the applicant about it.
Pat, you going to say?
So this is interesting now, so if this is becoming the parking lot for the regional transportation fleet, that's a little bit different than what we understand. So clarify that for us, Adam, really, what vehicles are here from what facilities? Do they go off all over the place? How is it used? A little bit more with respect to the fleet. The other issue is just with respect to the EV stations, enormous benefits for fleets to be electronic, or to be electric. There are lots of incentives from the manufacturers. So I wouldn't be surprised if next year ARC comes back and said, hey, we're converting our fleet because we got a massive rebate to do it, so.
Right, and
prudent,
they may have their
forward-thinking.
own reason to want to do that, and I haven't discussed it with them. And I will get you more detail in terms of the vehicles and where and how and when. And the sizes, yeah, we'll get you more detail on that, and yeah, when they'll be there, how many, and so on.
For planning purposes, I don't pretend to be an engineer, but wouldn't it make sense, I guess, knowing that electric is coming, wouldn't it make sense when you're putting blacktop and you're paving the area to put the pipes in at least, so that when it does come, you could run the wires through? And
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and like I said, I'll discuss it with the applicant. A lot of it, as you know, this is a nonprofit organization, a lot of it is everything is very tightly budgeted, and that'll be another consideration, but of course, pre-planning for a big change like that is probably more fiscally, wise, but again, it's gonna come down to the applicant and what they're able to do.
Is the intent for all of those spaces, and there's quite a few, I think they called out 120 or so?
We had 102.
Is that for fleet parking, front and rear of the building?
No, the front will continue to, the front hasn't changed much. The configuration of the parking and the handicap spaces has been made more efficient, and, among other things. But generally, the parking in the front, the drop-off area in relative size and number is essentially the same as what's there. It's just slightly reconfigured and made a little more efficient. The additional parking is really what's in the back.
So that's where the fleet will park
Yes, exactly.
overnight or so?
Right.
Space width, are they 8 or 10 feet?
The parking spaces, the proposed parking spaces are all shown at 10 feet, which is the town standard.
Okay. Any other questions? Adam will be back in two weeks, possibly, if you're ready.
Yes,
If not, talk to Rose when you're ready, and we'll get you
Yeah, I'll
on
talk
the
to
agenda.
Rose about ARC. I'll definitely be back in 2 weeks for Kiwi, and we'll,
Stormwater management.
right. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess adding 50 parking spaces, there's a lot to discuss with stormwater management. Rich pointed that out.
Yeah, we'll take a look at Rich's comments, and we'll be ready to respond to those.
And the fire?
Thanks.
Next on the agenda is Messina Family Trust, 174 Wixon Pond Road.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is an existing business that's operated out of this site in a residential zone for 70 years, something like that. Most of you know it. Really no physical changes to the site. It's legalizing the commercial use in this residential zone. I don't know what the impetus for it is. Paul can probably share that with us. But so there's a use variance that's required. There's a lot of stuff going on the site in terms of buildings and accessory structures. So there are a number of area variances that are associated with legalizing those existing buildings. Those are Mike's comments as well. And Rich didn't really have any issues with this, asked for some details on lighting and so forth. So really, it's legalizing an existing commercial operation.
Thanks, Pat. I know the area there, there is a lot of stuff going on there. When I was reading it right up, it mentions where's the daycare / nursery school. That's from Mike's memo. That has nothing to do with it. That's
No.
a typo.
That's a typo.
Okay.
Yes, there's, no.
I know there's a lot going on.
I think it's a different project.
All right, so I can strike that out, right? Pat mentioned why all of a sudden this has been like, this has been non-conforming since the 1970s. What's,
I believe a violation was issued for running a family business on the property.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. I think I spoke to Mike about this. There was a violation. I don't know if somebody complained, but Mike did issue a violation.
So that's what got us started.
Board, any comments?
Not really.
I do see this more of a zoning issue than a board issue. I mean, I do like the idea of taking a property from the 1970s that has a lot going on and cleaning it up, if you will, legalizing it. Pat, I think, mentioned there's also a slab there that's not even on the
Correct.
property line.
And I talked to the property owners about that, and before I even made the application, I told them that it's going to have to be removed. Since it's on the other person's, it's on the neighboring property.
So that should be in your submission, that slab will be removed.
Okay, I'll note that on the drawings.
One of Mike's comments is that there's a large amount of fill dumped on the property. I think we need to address that.
What was his comment?
A large amount of fill left on the property.
Okay.
I don't know if there's been test reports on that, if it's soil.
Not that I know of.
So they probably should come up with a plan of what's going to happen with that and provide a test report on that.
Okay.
And this is one, Mr. Chairman, where it'll benefit from the public hearing. If neighbors are the ones that are aggrieved by this, we should hear from them. And if necessary, we'll screen it, we'll add buffering, those sorts of things, so.
Mike's, and you can get a copy of this, Paul, as Anthony just mentioned, there's a large amount of fill dumped on the property. This should be addressed at the time. So we need approval from that before we can go any further.
Okay.
We've had experiences residentially that people brought in a lot of fill and they had to remove it all.
Okay. So I'll get that tested, and we'll get a report in.
My opinion is we should hold this over until we clarify that fill. We've had
So
issues
Paul,
before with that.
if you're going to do that, Mr. Chairman, further explain how this site operates. So for example, is this week's pipes brought to this site, deposited here? Is the fill from a job where they were trenching and brought to the site? Is this a staging area for the work they do off-site, or simply the office operation for the irrigation company?
My understanding is strictly the office operation, and they do have some materials that they bring to the site. I'm unaware of the fill issue, so I'm going to have to dig into that and find out what it is and where it came from, and we'll have it tested.
So the materials are brought there for the day, whatever job they're doing, do they stay overnight? And if they are they in a garage, or are they exposed that everybody can see them, do we know?
No, I think there's like a Quonset hut that if they have piping left over from that day's work or left over from a job, they'll just store it in the Quonset hut until they need it on the next job.
So nothing is left out so that people can see it?
No, you
It's
can't, you
residential.
can't see anything up there. When you drive by on the road, you just see the hillside, but you really don't, you don't see any of that operation in the back.
Well, I think we'll see you back here when you're ready.
Yeah, it'll probably be the end of the month, because right now I've had some other sites where I've had soil testing done, and it's been difficult in terms of getting the labs to actually get the work done. So it could be a month.
And up
So-
there,
but, yeah, when I
everything
have
up there
it-
runs down that hill, and there's Wixon Pond is right there, so it's important that that fill is clean.
So, yeah, once I have it, you'll have it.
Great,
Okay.
thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda for subdivision is Jedlicka, Regina, 334 Austin Road, sketch plan. Pat?
So this is a two-lot subdivision, is the plan that Joel just put up, indicates that the back lot would be a landlocked parcel. It would not have frontage on the primary street, so typically we address that through a 288 referral to the town board. Two lots, fully zoning compliant, otherwise, the existing home would remain, the new lot would support a new dwelling. There's some accessory structures on that lot that would have to be removed. I think Mike has raised some concerns about those buildings as well. There is the potential of a variance that's required. As you can see from the plan, Mike has consistently held, we have a lot width requirement, and when you have essentially a flag lot, the lot width dimension, if you drew a line from the lower corner to the upper corner, leaves the property line before returning to the property line. Mike has consistently held that that would not comply with the lot width requirement. That dimension has to remain within the property boundaries itself. So Mike's noted that as it's presented today, it would require a lot width variance. Other than that, very straightforward. There's no issues with respect to the construction of the new home, that we need to see some details about utilities, how you'd serve the lot, but plenty of room to do this. It just is a landlocked parcel, and that's the obstacle to this particular application.
Just to continue on what Pat was saying, this is the leg, this is the main part of the property. It's altogether it's over 8 acres. This is the existing house and the existing garage, and that's all remaining. The existing well, existing septic is going to remain. The new lot, which is required to be 120,000 square feet, which it is, and we've already had the health department out there to test the soil, and it passed, and it's just a matter of submitting the final details to the health department to get their approval. So as Pat said, the only thing we're looking for is, again, as Pat said, this lot only has 100-foot frontage on Austin Road. So when you start off this point over here, take it halfway, which is 50 feet, go all the way to the back of the lot and do the same thing. What happens is it starts on the Jedlicka property, goes off onto another piece of property, and then continues back on their property. Now, the total requirement is 200 feet. This total is probably in the neighborhood of 400 or 500 feet, but as Mike says, since it goes through another piece of property, a variance would be required. And the other variance that's going to be required is a 288 variance from the zoning board because the new lot number 2 does not have any frontage on Austin Road. So this lot, again, would require a 288 variance. We've already gotten the description of the area that has to be put into an easement so that once this lot is sold and built upon, they will have legal access to go from Austin Road to their driveway, which is up over here. So the owner of this lot will give this lot the easement to provide the proper access.
Joe, would you just trace out the outline of the 2.7 acre lot?
Which one?
Just point out the 2.7 acre lot.
Oh, yes,
Trace out the
okay.
perimeter of it.
These are the dark lines
Okay.
coming back over here.
And the driveway's going to enter in that lower
And the
left corner?
driveway comes over here, but then it
Okay.
connects into the existing driveway that all these years has accessed into the main house.
And there'll be an easement issued?
Yeah, we've already, as I said, the survey has given us the description, and we will file it or provide it to Joe to make sure that the easement is correct. Their attorney has written up the easement. We have the whole package together, and I'll email it to Joe for his review. So that's the only issue now, is to get that easement in the proper language, however the planning board attorney wishes to have it. But we have it all written up. It's just a matter of handling it.
Is it possible to connect to a road behind that property?
No, this is all part of Lake McGregor. These are all small lots over here.
And there's no opening there?
No, these are all existing houses on, unfortunately, very small lots.
So there's trailers there now that have activity going on now, some work going on?
No,
I was out there yesterday, Joe. There's trailers there that have some
it's not
construction
there,
going on now?
today. It's
Okay,
gone.
but So let me ask a question.
Sure.
Who's there?
What's going on with the trailers? Where's the house going to be in relationship to where the trailers are?
Okay, if you look at the map, this is the house, the proposed house.
Those are the trailers, right?
And, no, this is the proposed house. This long, narrow section is the former trailer.
So the trailer comes down and the house?
Oh, yeah, well, let me backtrack. Mrs. Jekyll was nice enough to show me, apparently years and years and years ago, this is like over 20 years ago, they went to the zoning board to ask if that trailer could be put on the property, because at that time it was one big lot with one house. And the zoning board said it was for Mrs. Jekyll's mother, excuse me. And the zoning board said that when she passes on, then the trailer has to be removed. So that's why it's been removed.
So the trailers are going to be removed? I think there's one trailer? Okay, okay, and that's where the house is going to go from the visual?
No. If you look at the map, the septic system is going to be in the area where the trailer was. The house is going to be in front of where the trailer was. So the house will be required 40 feet from the front property line.
And that pertains to Mike's question also, because Mike's question, he has it phrased here, but he was concerned with the compaction, I believe, where the trailer was. So you'll have to have that checked to see if it's possible.
Yeah, well, yeah. What we did is, when we had the health department out there, we tested on all areas all around it. The trailer itself has no foundation. It was just basically a trailer. So it was only on, maybe 4 or 6.
So, Mr. Chairman, we were unaware that the health department had already been out there.
Yeah.
So, problem solved.
So there's been a perk test performed?
Oh, yeah, we did the perk test, deep hole test, everything's been done, and it's been approved. Yes, that's all done. So basically, we're looking now to send this to the zoning board so we can get our variances.
So just to clarify, the lot with is a variance with the zoning board. Open development is a town board approval.
We don't go to the zoning board? Oh, okay. So
Questions from the,
send us to this town board then.
like Pat says, plenty of property, 8.7 acres, right? One's
Yes.
going to be 5.9, one's going to be 2.7. Prior to going, I hesitate to send something to the board without us putting a ribbon on it, making sure everything that we need.
Yeah, there's some cleanup details that
Yeah,
need to be provided. Whether you
I'm
want to,
supportive of this, but I don't really want to send something to the town board yet until
What items are you looking for?
Mike's comments. Mike's got several of them. A separate subdivision plat, sign and seal, survey of the property.
If you look at
of the new,
drawing number
A driveway maintenance agreement between lots 1 and 2. Additional topography of the site should be provided.
Well, to answer your first question, if part of the submission was the actual plat that's going to be filed in the county clerk's office with all the information that is required for us, for a subdivision from our surveyor. So we have basically the site plan, which is what we did, which shows the house and the design. And then we have the plat, the subdivision plat, which will be filed in the county clerk's office. So,
The grading plan, has that been provided?
so that the site engineering details are not provided yet. So stormwater management grading,
I'm in favor of this project,
so am I.
but I don't want to send it on to the town board until all the Ts are crossed and dots. It's disrespectful to the town board to do such.
I'm not questioning that, it's just, I've never seen the reports.
So,
I have no idea what you're
yeah,
talking
so you can get the reports. I'd like you to sit down with Pat and Mike and check them all off, and then we're ready to go, I believe. I don't know if anyone on the board wants to add anything to that.
The driveway maintenance agreement, you'd have to provide some,
Well, as I told you, it's already been prepared, I just have
okay.
to get Joe to approve it.
So we'd like to
so.
see that.
So that, that would only be 2 weeks. If you can get, Mike's not here to speak for himself, Rich is not here to speak for themselves. I'd like to close with those two gentlemen. Let me send it on.
No problem, just get us the reports, that's all.
Joel, just so when you take a look on Rich's report, he does say a couple of referrals would be necessary.
Referrals to who?
For instance, he says here, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, New York City Department of Environmental Protection.
For what? This is not part of the, it's not part of the watershed.
I'm not an engineer, I don't know, but I'm just saying that's what Rich said, so we can,
I have no idea what he's talking about.
okay.
Speak to Rich, speak to Mike.
Yeah.
You can be back in 2 weeks. And if you've answered the questions.
It's fine. As I said, just let us see the
Yeah.
questions.
Get this, Rose will give this to you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not trying to give you a hard time, I just hesitating to send this
I,
to the town board.
actually, I do agree with you,
Yeah.
but if I don't have, if I don't know what
Rose
they
will
want,
give this
I
all
can't
to
do
you,
it.
yeah.
And Joel, just a bond estimate too, so you can get a head start on that, so when you come back from zoning board, that's not a delay.
I thought we're not going to the zoning board.
You are for the width, lot width, and then open development to town board, 2 different boards.
Okay.
So Pat, logistically, how does that work? Do they need to go to the zoning board first and to the?
You do simultaneously, so
Okay.
we don't lose time.
But I think I like the project because I drove back there, beautiful house is
Yeah.
there now. There'll be, I'm sure, another beautiful house there
Yes, well,
instead of a trailer.
it's right there.
And it's 8 acres of land to do this.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Okay, thank you
Thanks,
very
Joe,
much.
thanks. Okay, next on our agenda tonight is we're going to review and start commenting on the town board referral, the comprehensive master plan and zoning code draft. I sent out a note to you folks yesterday, so Pat's going to facilitate something, working with us. I think most of us brought our documents. Was it page 35 or so we want to start talking through? And again, this is our first of as many meetings as we need to do due diligence on this.
So, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, as you've seen, the document's been broken down into, I think, 7 broad topics, sections. Land use, economic and environment, housing, transportation, and so forth. For each of those, the draft plan provides some goals, very broad, 30,000-foot goals. And underneath each of those goals, there are objectives, the method by which the goal would be achieved. So I thought to provide context, that's a great place for us to start in terms of providing comment back to the town board. So I thought we'd just go through them one by one, get a sense of your reaction to the goal. Is it the right goal? Do we need to adjust the goal? And the objectives, is that the right tool to achieve the goal? It's important to bear in mind that the words that are embedded in this document matter. Sometimes it's 2 words that provide the basis for a developer to do something or for you to deny something that a developer wants to do. So the language is really, really important. So again, I'm encouraging you to look at this very carefully. One thing I will emphasize is the referral that was sent to you from the town board said, do this in 45 days. We've had conversations with the supervisor, with council, who have said, we'd rather you get it right than do it quickly. So if we get through 1 goal tonight and we do it correctly, so be it. We have as much time to do this correctly as we need, and I think the town board would appreciate our diligence in doing this correctly. So don't sweat the time issue with respect to this.
Agreed.
So if you like, we can jump right into it, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So goal 1 is allow development in a pattern consistent with the land use plan. So that's what a comprehensive plan is. It produces a vision for the town. In this case, it is a plan that was embedded in the document, and everything has to be consistent with that. The importance of a comprehensive plan is once adopted, everything we do must be in conformance with that comprehensive plan. So if you say to a developer, do something else, even though it's not in the plan, that's a problem. That's a challengeable decision you have made because it's inconsistent with the plan. So goal 1 is stating the obvious, basically. You got to do this in a consistent manner. So the first objective is revitalize Mahopac and Carmel downtowns. So the interesting thing about that is we've been trying to do that for 25 years. It's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. Thanks for the goal. you know, the objective, yeah, kind of, we're trying. We're with you on that. What I would suggest with respect to that, it's more than simply stating we ought to be doing something to revitalize these areas. We know we should be doing something to revitalize these areas. What tools are being put in place to incentivize that? So there are really two bullets that the plan recommends. Number one, allow 2- and 3-story buildings, retail below, offices or apartments above. In many instances, that's something we've been permitting already.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
So what else did that produce for us? And the second was reserve view corridors for the lakes, sort of a design issue. To me, I think we are deficient in that recommendation, in that in order to, we've been trying to do something. In order for something to happen, there has to be incentives. There has to be a reason for a developer to spend their money in this community. So what is he getting in exchange for coming to Carmel, coming to Mayapack? 2 and 3 stories, not a great incentive on a 50 by 100-foot lot. You're getting the small scale development. If that's where we want to be, we're not achieving a heck of a lot of revitalization in our hamlets. If the only thing we are trying to do is preserve some view corridors to the lakes, that's not a great incentive to a developer. So there has to be something else in terms of incentives to developers to come to our hamlets to invest in them. There's really a couple of ways to incentivize development. Number one, give them something more than what they can get elsewhere. So is 2 and 3 stories the maximum? Is a 4th story? Is some extra floor area ratio? What else can they get? Another element with respect to incentives is the process itself. So if a developer has to come to us, go to the zoning board, get referred to the open development for a town board, if the process is burdensome, they're going to Somers. They're going to somewhere else where they can get through the process quicker. If we have the ability to embed in our process an expedited review for the kind of projects we want, that's an incentive. So there are lots of examples like that of incentives. Number one, I get more. Number two, it's easier. That's basically the 2 buckets of incentives you can give a developer. The other thing is financial incentives. We don't have a lot of control over that, the town itself. We can facilitate grants from other funding sources, but we don't have a pot of money to say, come here and we'll offset a cost of, some of the cost of your development project. We don't have the resources to do that. So objective 1 is sort of self-evident, but I don't think there's enough in that objective to achieve the goal. So that, I'll offer that as a starting point for the conversation.
No, it's really not much different. Like you said, we've been allowing retail on the ground floor. We've approved some offices upstairs, residential upstairs in the town of Carmel. A couple projects we've done that to already.
So I think objective 1.1 was sort of generalized. Calling out those 2 bullets, I think, I would rather not have the bullets at all. Sort of say, let's do a good job, and we'll get to how you do it in some of the other objectives. So
Take that on a case-by-case or an applicant-by
yeah,
applicant basis.
or have 100 bullets here, you know what I mean? So either have none or a lot of them. So number 2, 1.2 is kind of where we
So
get.
Pat,
I'm sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to interrupt, and I know you and I have talked, everyone on the board knows about this, but it's almost like we have to start with the infrastructure.
So that's number 2. So if you look to objective 1.2, now we hit the issue.
All right, sorry.
So before we move on, are we
Yeah,
saying the 2 bullets in 1.1 are going to be, we're suggesting they be removed?
So my recommendation is that those are, and especially the view corridor thing,
Because I have
that's the
commented that
main issue we want to emphasize, to revitalize. That's
I
not-
have commented about the view corridor, but that's addressed elsewhere
I think
in the thing.
there's a whole other
Yeah.
series of recommendations, Bob, that address views and the lake issues. I think
And I've
that's where
commented
we
about
deal with it.
Yeah, okay.
I'd
great.
rather not emphasize, like, that's, if the first policy that jumps out of the book is, I want to see the lake, I don't know if that's the most important thing for us for policy 1, you know what I mean? So 1.2 is the heart of the matter. So this is consider creating mixed-use zoning that allows infill development. And in the first sentence, it talks about it. It hits the nail on the head. In this case, it's not really the hamlets, it's generalized development, provided sewer capacity exists. That's our Achilles heel. That's the biggest problem we're dealing with right now. And the best illustration of that is the boutique hotel application that you saw that's before you now, where effectively that one project was using up all the water capacity for the downtown, for Mayapack. That means is no one else can do anything. So what's the sense of saying, come into Mayapack and revitalize, repurpose, redevelop these buildings if we can't serve them with water? So underlying everything is an appropriate assessment of sewer and water capacity. There very likely would be bad news at the end of the day for the town board, which is if we want something to happen here, we need more water and sewer, especially in the hamlets, especially in these areas where they're not going to be served by individual wells and septic systems. So that's a capital cost. If it's a capital cost, there's an issue associated with that. Somebody's going to pay for it. The fundamental issue that relates to any redevelopment exercise, any development exercise, is investment in infrastructure accommodates additional development. Additional development generates tax ratables. Tax ratables offset the cost of the infrastructure improvements. So it's a wholesome cycle that you hope exists. If you invest in the infrastructure and they don't show up, however, now you've got an unholy cycle that is problematic. So, yeah, Bob.
Is what you're suggesting, the natural conclusion of that is that sewer and water ought to be an objective, the analysis of it, the revitalization of it, whatever, or the building of it, needs to be its own objective?
So I don't even know that how we would couch the objective. So yes, but what I would suggest is just like assessing the traffic capacity of our roadways. No reason to develop an area if the traffic is going to stall and we can't get through the downtowns because there's too much traffic. It's the same thing with sewer and water. So fundamental to the recommendations should be an assessment of sewer and water to determine if we have enough to do the things we want to do. Bear in mind, one of the positive recommendations, or theoretically positive recommendations in the plan, is to abandon our sole 3-acre zoning and create some different zoning districts. A 1-acre zone, back to what we used to have 15 or 20, years ago. That's tripling the density of a third of the town by creating this 1-acre zone. Sewer and water, which of those areas are in sewer districts and water districts? Some of them are, some portions of them are. Others are now in areas that would have to be served by wells and septic systems. Because we now have smaller sites, it's more difficult to find suitable locations for wells and septic systems. So that technical assessment is fundamental to the vision we're embedding in the comprehensive plan. And I don't know that assessment was satisfactorily done to properly reach these goals. So I think that's a significant issue.
So I remember conversation way back, and it was brought up that at one time they considered tying in the sewer to Westchester, but then Westchester said no, they didn't want any part of it.
Yeah.
So the implication, I guess, is then we have to build our own facility to handle it. Forgive my ignorance, do we already have a facility?
We do.
Okay.
We have water districts, we have sewer treatment plants, and I had a long conversation with Rich about this, and is there a technical impediment to expansion? Rich's position is no.
Okay.
We spend the money, you can enlarge these facilities, so it's not impractical. So when you get to Westchester, the water infrastructure is dictated by the DEP. We're separate and independent. We're running our own facilities outside of watershed areas, so DEP can't limit it. When you get down county, those communities buy their water from DEP, and DEP can just say, no, I'm giving you X gallons, and that's it. We're not giving you any more because our primary customer is New York City. So we're only giving you the leftover stuff, that's it. We're not dependent on DEP necessarily for the city's water supply from the Catskill and Delaware watersheds. We can do this ourselves. So you drill more community wells, you provide a larger sewage treatment plant. It's possible to do those things. The downside is it costs a heck of a lot of money to do that. So there's the balance that the elected officials have to wrestle with. Is it appropriate, necessary, and a long-term benefit to do that? Again, if properly done, and the the bones of doing it properly are here. If by facilitating that, we can accomplish some of these goals, new ratables coming into our community, that's our tax base has been expanded, and we're paying off the cost of the infrastructural improvements, instead of it just being a burden on taxpayers. So it's a complicated exercise, and there is clearly a risk involved. So we have, again, I don't mean to disparage, but we have tried for a long time, and nobody's shown up. I remember 20 years ago, there was an emphasis more than that on industrial use in the town. We did an assessment. I remember one of the Columbia University came in and did an assessment of the potential of industrial use, and the reaction was, there's plenty of land to build factories here. Yeah, and those are good ratables, good idea. And at the time, we had industrial zoning in the community. Supervisor sort of sent out the word, please come, nobody came. So it's more than simply saying, we'd like to see something in our community. We have to facilitate the arrival of those things into our community. So to the credit of the plan, and we'll talk about it as we move through, that there's some innovation in terms of the types of things we can accommodate in the community. But again, it ain't gonna work if you turn on the tap and there's no water coming out of it. So that's sort of one of the challenges that we have to face up to.
So if they do an assessment and determine that the cost is beyond what they want to invest in, and that therefore some of these things can't be done, do they disappear from the plan?
So, a plan can do a couple of things. It can be aspirational. We hope you do this stuff, please. Or it can be much more realistic, which is, here's where you can do these things, come and do this. The water's here, the sewer here. It's not really aspirational, it's sort of setting the stage, teeing up development. That's the best way to do this, because there's no uncertainty. If this business, we sit in front of these guys every 2 weeks. There's a risk involved in going through this process. The more we minimize the risk, the more those folks will show up and invest their money in our community. When every application needs a variance, needs some relief, I'm not sure if I'm gonna get water, how is the engineering department gonna deal with this application? There's a lot of risk associated with that. So I think if we're going through this exercise, all this time, effort, and energy to produce a plan that has a good vision for the community, it should also include the mechanism to facilitate that vision occurring.
I think it has to first.
Sorry, I have a question. I mean, I looked through all the documents, and it's really exciting, and seeing all the different examples of different, Katona and, the different places. It's beautiful, it looks really good. My question, though, and this may not be an answer that we can answer, a question we can answer, we have so much open space now, so much open retail space, we have vacant buildings, we have all this. What could we do to entice people to even come here?
So that's a great point. And again, these are all specific things that we'll probably should be going through. I think tonight, I'm happy to do a freewheeling conversation like we're doing now. I think it's a good starting point. But we do have to go through these individually, and some of this will come out. But you raise a great point. So they recognize the fact that we have shopping centers along Route 6 that are clearly underutilized.
Yeah.
And most of them have lots and lots of vacancies. So they've suggested you ought to allow mixed uses, different kinds of uses to go in there. And you've seen this now elsewhere where those shopping centers are being repurposed and they have mixed uses, there's residential uses going into them. The recommendation in the plan is we'll create a zone and an applicant can petition the town to change the zone. Once again, we've shifted the burden back to an applicant, making it harder for them to go through the process. If we want that to occur, we should change the zone. We should embed in that zone the incentives to attract a developer, density provisions and so forth that give them an economic benefit to develop in there and make it easy for them. So right now, the kernel of the idea is there, but the mechanism makes it hard to achieve the vision. To me, that's not the best way to do this. And especially, so I'm sure you've seen this in many communities around us, not so much here. It's like pushing a snowball downhill. It takes the first, and I call them champions, the first courageous developer to come into a community to find out, oh, I can get through the process promptly. It didn't cost me an arm and a leg. They didn't chop off, half of my development just for the sake of doing it. That champion builds something, and all of a sudden everybody else takes notice. And within 6 months, we have application after application coming in because the word gets out. It's never been the case. We've never had someone do that. We've had people try, and those applications have not gone anywhere necessarily. But if we can facilitate that process through our comprehensive plan, I assure you, it won't be just one guy. It will be, oh, there's an area that's been overlooked for a long time. There's a market that's underserved for all of the various things that have been pointed out. We ought to be in that community. We're not, as I said to Craig the other day when we were chatting about this, we're kind of off the beaten path. You know, that's one of the problems. So no one's coming here necessarily from Peekskill or Lower Westchester County or wherever for a pizzeria. You know, there has to be some reason to come to our community. So one of the things that I think is really critical, and they touched on it a bit, but they didn't expand on it enough, was finding those unique niches from a land use perspective. What kind of unique things can we facilitate? A couple of years ago when the distillery came through, I thought that was going to be the thing for us. All of a sudden, we'd be recognized as this community that has this kind of thing. And now we have craft breweries and we have craft distilleries because we have a big distillery that's driving that sort of market. And now you start to capitalize on that. One of the things that they've, I think, focused on and tried to capitalize on is the agricultural component. Good idea, but I'm not sure that that's the right target for us because we're not a rural agricultural community necessarily. So we have gentleman farms and we have small kind of crafty farms. If that's what it is, then that's one thing. If we are Iowa, that's a totally different thing. And right now, it's not clear to me. There's sort of allusions to, we want to be kind of like Iowa. I don't know that we would ever be like Iowa for a lot of different circumstances. So the whole notion of an agricultural component as a strong basis for our economy, not sure that that's there. And again, just like in utility infrastructure, the market demand is fundamental to what we allow in terms of our land uses. So understanding the agricultural market and the craft brewery market and the distillery market, really imperative. And again, I don't know that a lot of that underlying analysis is reflected in the recommendations that have come forth in the plan at the moment. So that we're building a foundation on assumptions, not necessarily facts in some instances, which is a little bit, there's a little bit of jeopardy.
Pat, I know we have to move on, but just one other point to Vicky, so we'll move on, is I think we take a very small step in allowing residential above retail. In the sense is, as we start renting out some of these spaces, the landlords start renting out some of these spaces, that's more people going to the pizzeria or to the nail salon or to the beer distributor or to the CVS or wherever the case. I think it's a small step, but it is a step in the right direction.
It's a great step in the right direction, and it's, you know, the regional sales guys for all of these chains, for Starbucks and so forth, they're looking for customers. That's why they build these stores. If you bring the customers there, the Starbucks follows. It's almost organic. So
We just got to change the way we have, I mean, we do have residential above commercial, but it's an eyesore. We all know that. 6N, with all those fire escapes right there, is an eyesore, and it is one of the biggest Achilles heels for this town.
So one of the interesting things, and again, I'm jumping around and I apologize, I promised myself I wouldn't jump around, but one of the great things that's come out of this is they've touched on two great recommendations. Number one was design guidelines, and we've talked about that for a long time. All of the architectural stuff has fallen into your lap. We don't have design guidelines, good design lines, because design guidelines help. The other thing they've referenced is something called form-based zoning, and I don't know if some of you are familiar with that, but that's being used quite effectively in a lot of our downtown areas all over the place. And what that basically is embedding the design guidelines into the zoning and going far beyond that, so that it's almost zoning criteria that relates to the design of a building. So for example, the amount of glass on a storefront is a zoning issue. 60% of the storefront has to have a certain amount of glass, it has to be a certain size. The number of doors in a storefront, you have to have a lot of doors because that creates activity on the street, and people walking on the street's a good thing. Form-based zoning, and same thing, the amount of a blank wall can only be a certain distance before it does something. There's a jog in the wall, or there's a window in the wall. That zoning creates building forms that kind of things we like to see. So we constantly say to the developers, I kind of like this New England, kind of sensibility. That sentence is all we're giving those folks. That sentence could be translated into 10 pages of very specific criteria on how you achieve that. That's form-based zoning, and what form-based zoning also does is, where our zoning today, conventional zoning, starts from the use, form-based zoning starts with what you build. So almost, I don't care what you put in it, but it's got to look like this, and this is what we really want our areas to look like, our downtowns to look like. Whether it's a restaurant or a pizzeria or a nail salon or Starbucks, we kind of don't care. If it's in a really good-looking building and it's designed appropriately, the uses will follow. So that's form-based zoning. So what they've suggested is maybe consider some form-based zoning, but do these design guidelines. I'd rather see the form-based zoning with really good design guidelines really embedded in it. I think that's a great tool for us. The other thing form-based zoning does is it eliminates uncertainty. So if a developer comes to us and we tell them, this is what you build, this is how much glass you have to have in the front of your building, this is where your door has to be, this is how tall you can be, this is the kind of roof you can put on your building, do that, and we'll get you through the approval process in a single meeting, because you've built what we want you to build. You have no discretion. They will build exactly what you want them to build. So in exchange for that is an expeditious review process. You get through the process, in some instances, with a building permit. You don't even need discretionary site plan approval from the planning board, because you meet all the criteria and all the rules. Form-based zoning, something to think about.
Pat, I agree with everything you've said about form-based zoning. The one thing that had me scratching my head is, when you're talking about, for example, downtown Mahopac, the buildings are already there.
Yeah.
So how does form-based zoning work on an area that has already been built?
So that's the issue, right? So we have many buildings that are undesirable, that are underwhelming in many instances, that are historically there, and they are what they are. Everything that those buildings would do in terms of revitalization and repurposing would have to comply with these new rules and regulations. So you got to keep up with the Joneses. That's what that law basically says. Pre-existing non-conforming still applies. If you stay the way you are forever, you can remain a crappy building forever if you want to remain a crappy building. But if you want to add a use or modify your building or keep up with the Joneses, here's how you do it. So it's a gradual thing. We're not doing traditional redevelopment where we tear down a block, the bulldozer starts on one end and finishes at the other end, and we start from scratch. We're not doing that. We're infilling development. So it's going to be a situation that occurs over time. But what I will tell you, and the proof's in the pudding, drive around lower Westchester County, mid Westchester County, drive around some of the communities in Rockland County. As soon as the champion shows up and that one building on the corner or in the center of the downtown goes up, everybody starts to, oh, I should be reinvesting in my property. Look what they've done across the street. And by the way, they got all the good tenants, and their rents for that commercial space is 5 times what I'm getting right now in my commercial space. I'm renovating so I can get those kinds of rents out of my building. It's sort of an inevitable process. So that's form-based zoning. So again, sidetracked.
We try to limit them, but it's good to have this dialogue.
So that's objective 1.1, 1.2. 1.3 is ensuring that the CP zoning district, this is where Gateway Plaza and so forth, Fairways Gateway, that's the zone that this is talking about. They're talking about the senior housing in this particular area. They're talking about diversifying that. So we've talked about this periodically. The only multifamily use we had for so long was just senior housing. Senior housing doesn't need to be discrete. We should be talking about multifamily housing, whether it's old folks or young folks, it's the same building. The restriction on being 55 and above, 65, whatever it is an artificial limitation, and as long, there's no need to limit us to that regard. It's the same demographic, old folks downsizing and young folks trying to get into the housing market. So why eliminate half the market because of some issue that related to a concern about schools 30 years ago? As you all know, we have enrollments that are declining. We need kids in the school district actually now, so it's not a bad thing anymore. It's not taboo. So I think this is simply saying we should be diversifying the types of housing stock that we're permitting in those particular areas.
Why limit it to only that type of zoning district? I
So
mean,
again, maybe they were thinking about limitations on sewer and water. I tend to agree, but it's all about sewer and water. So yeah, I think we do need to expand those multifamily uses elsewhere in the community. And they've suggested certain districts where you could do that. But again, it's all about sewer and water. Now, that district has sewer and water, the ability to connect to sewer and water, and we've assessed that a million different times. So that's an area where it's suitable. The 1.4 is another interesting one. So this is update the code to reflect current uses. I'm a big fan of this. Again, I don't know if you know the way this works, but there's a zoning code, it's out there, it's online, and every day, 35 different professionals looked at our code today, and tomorrow 25 will, and the next day 45 will. Every day, there are people fishing in every community, and what they do is they look at the zoning code. So again, if I'm the regional acquisition manager for Starbucks, I'm looking at all these codes and looking, what am I considered in your zoning code? In the case of Starbucks, it's probably a restaurant or a fast food restaurant, a takeout restaurant, whatever it is, they're looking for those things. Today, our code is fairly limited. It's not innovative, it's sort of retail service, office, restaurant, very basic categories. And what Mike wrestles with all the time is making interpretations. When somebody comes to us and says, I've got this use, do I fit into a pigeonhole? And oftentimes they don't. Oftentimes Mike's left making an interpretation. Yeah, I guess you fit into that pigeonhole. Sometimes it goes to the zoning board for the zoning board to make an interpretation of whether it fits in the pigeonhole. I would like to see, and they've recommended expanding the pigeonholes, adding more pigeonholes. Now, they've offered only a couple. I think we could really expand those pigeonholes again because we are in many ways a blank slate. When you look at Carmel, there's no obvious thing that says, oh, that's a community that wants to be this. And if you look at some communities all over, look at Rhinebeck, they use the example, it's artsy-fartsy and craft stores and antique shops. That's what that's all about. We don't give off that vibe for anything. So sooner or later, hopefully, that will evolve organically. So offering a broad spectrum of what could occur in this community is probably a useful exercise until we decide that's where we're going. So at the moment, we're fishing too. We're fishing for those folks to come to our community. So what the consultants have suggested is things like glamping, short-term home rentals, telecommunication facilities. I don't have to tell you the trouble we had with that. And large-scale energy facilities that they're talking about battery storage, but that's going to lead into solar facilities. They're expanding all over the place. I don't want the town to be just solar fields. That's not a great, we get a little bit of economic revenue from that, but that's not the kind of thing. What I'm thinking about is these innovative things that are going in elsewhere. So again, I'll just give you a list of stuff that exists in other codes in other communities. Experiential retail, which is you go and you have your yoga class and then you buy yoga stuff in the store at the same time. You have a cooking class and you buy pots and pans. That's called experiential retail. It's almost like a crafty facility that sells stuff at the same time. Sometimes that's when a building inspector gets there, like, I don't know what you are. Are you a dance studio? Are you a restaurant? Are you a retail store? Clarify that. That name in the code is an invitation to those companies. Community gathering place businesses, a similar kind of thing. We have meetings in a particular building, and there's also a cafe, or there's also a retail store. Craft breweries, distilleries, theaters and performing art venues, we don't have that. Galleries, museums, boutique hotels, co-working space, something that's very popular now, especially post-COVID. That's kind of an office use generally. But again, if it's in the code, WeWorks and so forth, their manager sees it's in the code, it must be easy to get that done in this community because they recognize this and they show up.
Pat, should we spell out B&Bs being a lake community?
B&Bs, absolutely.
It says short-term rentals. But that doesn't necessarily mean B&B.
Yeah, that even troubles me, the way that's phrased. The B&B is very different than a short-term rental. A
And
short-term rental is,
there are two sides to short-term rentals. They're not
exactly,
all
that's the
positive.
point. Yep.
But B&Bs would be something you would want to see spelled out in here, right?
I think that's a
Because
great,
of our lake
potentially great use. Artisan and craftsman workshops, that's again, a funky thing. If you go to Rhinebeck, you see a guy on a pottery wheel, and you could buy the pottery right there. That's the kind of cool thing. Athletic training facilities, where the trainers are training you, and you see guys pushing tires on sidewalks in communities now, because that's now a permissible use. Business incubators, pop-up businesses. Short-term businesses, eBay selling centers. So if you're an eBay seller, once a week, you get to share a space where you can bring your stuff to that building. And the next day, the other eBay seller is in there, and the next day, another the seller is in there. So again, it's not traditional retail, and it's really online selling, but there's a venue where you can touch the stuff periodically. So that's just a sampling of
Question.
the kind of innovative uses that other communities are embedding in their codes that we could be talking about as
Question.
well.
Some of, I mean, I understand B&Bs and maybe breweries and theaters being a little
Yep.
bit different, but some of these things just, it's a storefront space, and it's how you use it. Why do we even need to trouble ourselves
So again,
in
it's
the zoning?
It's the point, Bob, of an invitation. So if you're indicating you're allowable here, you're this unique use.
Just saying it's allowable, okay.
It's making it easy. So that, again, I'm trying to make the entry ramp into our community from the commercial business as simple and efficient as possible. That's, I think, the goal, and then it's up to the private sector to be our partner in achieving that goal. But we need to get out of the way and make it easy to bring those facilities into our community. That's sort of
It also lessens the burden from the building department to make these interpretations. More and more, you're seeing the zoning board get issues of interpretation, whether a use fits in a particular area. So as Pat said, to the extent that we can codify it and make that entree easier, it lessens the burden on the ZBA, it lessens the burden on the building department, and it fits under the code based on the black and white letter.
The other thing that is obvious to everybody is the world changed in the past few years. So the way even traditional businesses operate, we were talking about, going into work regularly to the offices, and who does and who doesn't, how they share the space these days. It's all changing. So it's a very, very fluid land use world we're dealing with right now. So unless we have some recognition of this in the code, we're going to be readopting the master plan in 5 years when the world sort of has finished its spin and we know where things are shaking out. So it's a very challenging time to be planning for the future when the future is so uncertain in many different ways. But we're doing it. So I think, again, be as flexible as we can within the curbs of the road.
Pat, everything that we're trying to promote and changing codes for people to look and zoning, and it's all well and good, but we don't have the agricultural aspect. We don't have an apple orchard. You go down Hardscrabble Road to North Salem, there's all the orchards you want.
Yeah.
Everything is around us. What we have as a town are lakes,
Yep,
okay?
yep.
We need to focus on that, and that's what we need to sell. Everything that comes with a lake. Now, the flip side to that is, if I wanted to put a boat in the water, there's no public launch for me as a Mayapack or a Carmel resident.
So
I know that gets into other things, but I think we gotta
100% agree
focus
with
on
you.
what we have to offer.
100% agree with you. So I think the consultants sort of intuitively recognize that, right? But the recommendations that are a little further on, we'll talk about them.
We can go
Kind
later
of
if you want.
miss the boat in many ways. No pun intended. But they're, encouraging public access to the waterfront that's privately owned is a challenge. We know the limitations that we're dealing with the properties on the waterfront, which are tiny little slivers of land. So the reality of how these things work, it's a mixed bag, and limiting the kinds of things you would go to a lake to do is counterintuitive to saying this is why we are a community about our lakes. But, I'm sure there's a balance in there somewhere, but it has to be better defined. There's one recommendation to perhaps we should adopt a local waterfront revitalization plan. That's an interesting double-edged sword because it does open up more funding sources for us, but it also establishes a whole nother layer of regulatory control that do we really want to do that? So everybody that wants to build a Joel Greenberg extension to a boathouse has to comply with 44 different waterfront policies and deal with a waterfront commission referral like we do with the ECB. That's not a user-friendly tool necessarily. And if it unlocks millions of dollars for us to deal with stuff, yeah, maybe it's a good bargain with the devil. But if it's, $10,000 every 5 years of grant money we're eligible for, it's kind of not worth it. So I think thinking about joining programs like that, there are pros and cons, and we should fully understand the consequences of something like that. Again, one of the fundamental things that didn't come through to me in this whole process was making it easier to do the things we want to get done. It seems as though there are sort of more regulatory impediments to getting the things done that we want to get done and the way it's sort of situated today, so.
But even if there's limited lake access, but we built up around, a restaurant overlooking, with a rooftop, business with a rooftop restaurant, people would all from the
People would
surrounding
come.
communities would come here for that.
They'd come to fish, they'd come to water ski, they'd come to
Yeah.
jet ski.
Yeah.
They're gonna park there, then they're gonna come out and they're gonna go to a restaurant and they're gonna eat. That's what we have to focus on.
I think that's.
And it's not
that's-
just Lake Mayapack. I mean, we have multiple lakes.
That's the multiple benefits of a particular use, so I completely agree with that. I'm gonna get some ice cream with the kids after I get off the boat. There's myriad supplementary ancillary uses that run along with an emphasis on that. So I think that's the target. That makes a lot of sense, Anthony. I think you're 100% right about that. But some of those policies need to be thought through a little bit better, I think.
And what about the traffic that comes with all these wonderful people coming up with their boats and going for ice cream? Is that, I haven't looked into that in the plan. Is that part of it?
So it's not really.
Yeah.
One of the things I will say, however, traffic in our hamlets is a good thing. That means it's busy. That means people are coming here. So don't be, the instinctive reaction to most people who post stuff is, oh, there's gonna be a lot of traffic. Good, in many instances, good. When the traffic is unmanageable, problem. But right now,
The town has recognized the parking, though, and it's
Yeah.
one code will allow
parking's the
80 to
challenge. So
100 parking spaces.
to your point, if we create a restaurant on the waterfront, that means a lot of parking on the waterfront. That means dealing with the rich-related stormwater issues on the waterfront. That engages DEC and DEP. So again, conflicting regulatory policies that we can sort out in a comprehensive plan, but it's really not been sorted out at the moment. So we got to get in front of that rather than behind it. And I don't want to, in every instance, yield our authority to DEP, to DEC, to some other, to DOT, to other agencies. We need to control our destiny with respect to this. 1.5 is design guidelines. Again, I love design guidelines, maybe in a form-based code, but I'm loving them. And that's 1.6, where they talk about the form-based code. I think it's a very, very useful tool for us.
Questions? They're focused on Katona, and I'm very supportive of that, but there are a couple things that they are emphasizing from Katona that seem at odds with what's, I've got comments about. Buildings are set to the sidewalk. That seems very restrictive, so, and also very overly uniform. So if I'm looking for a broken up architectural
So this is-
setting, I might want someone to, or allow someone to go further back from the building line and have a courtyard where they could, have seating for a restaurant, for example, and something like that. So that was one.
Yep, so let me just, I want to,
Yeah.
that's an important element to form-based zoning. So the traditional Main Street, if you think of a traditional Main Street, buildings right up to the front property line, streetscape unified, that's a streetscape goal that's often embedded in form-based zoning. Many of the codes, like we have setbacks, most form-based codes have what they call build-to lines, which you must build to the front property line. If we choose to have courtyards periodically and so forth, we build into the code, that's fine. But what she's referring to is a typical tool to create the traditional downtown, where all the storefronts are lined up, and you can think of them when you walk down You know, all of the illustrative examples that they gave you, unified streetscapes, whether it's here or Telluride, Colorado, or wherever it is.
Ridgefield, Connecticut. You want an example? Just walk right down Main
That's
Street.
that's a great example. Very traditional, the same kind of architecture we want to see as a community like that, yeah.
That's a great example. Ridgefield
Ridgefield is
what we're looking for.
The candy shop, the boutique shop, the
Yep.
restaurant, the burger place. I mean, it's
And
just-
the issue with that relates to parking. So communities like that have public parking, municipal parking. It's not all that convenient, but it's okay, because you'll walk past 5 stores and you'll go to 4 of them. And it's a fun thing to do. When there's nothing to walk past, yeah, I'm complaining
Go
about
up one
parking,
side
because I had
and
to
come
walk
down the
past
other side.
7
Yeah,
vacant
that's
stores to
exactly
get
what
where
we
I wanted to go.
That's
and
a strolling town.
Yeah.
That's what we're
Yeah.
looking
You
for.
park, doesn't matter. You're gonna walk
Precisely
all the way
right.
up one side and down the other.
So to Bob's point, a strolling town has sort of a unified area. When you start having gaps in the streetscape, it gets scary. And I don't mean to pick on you, but for someone, you know, a woman at night, there's gaps and there's alleys that get scary. The unified streetscape is something that eliminates that and makes it a more friendly streetscape. So that's the planning theory behind it, but if we choose to make modifications to that for courtyards, which is a great example, that's a little bit different than alleys and so forth. So
One other comment.
Yeah.
Angled parking, you know, obviously, we've been talking about doing away with angled parking, so, you know, it looks nice, so that's just something that
And
seems
usually we
at
can
odds.
pick up spaces when you start angling parking.
Yeah.
You need the wider road to
Yeah.
do it, though. That's the problem,
Okay.
the wider right-of-way. And the other issue with respect to those issues, most of our roads aren't our roads, county roads or state roads. So again, we have other agencies involved in saying, no, you can't do that. Our standard for the road is parallel spaces or whatever. So I will say, even if it's contrary to an existing standard that the DOT or the county may have, if we have a planning rationale embedded in a comprehensive plan, those other regulatory agencies will listen to us. Whether it's contrary to the standards or not, they'll listen and they'll try to achieve our goals. If we don't have that embedded in somewhere, and we say, please do this on your road, they're gonna say, why would I do that? I'm gonna do it the way we do it. Nothing says you like this. When it's in the code, when it's in our comprehensive plan, they have to take that into consideration in their evaluation of things. So we have a lot of different partners. I said it before, good or bad, they're there. DEP, DEC, DOT, the county in many different ways. Establishing our vision in the comprehensive plan is getting them on board. It's a useful tool for us. So that was 1.6, form-based zoning. Consolidating the various, so the other issue that we really want to look at, and aside from the assignment I gave you to read through this section, take a look at the map that's proposed. So right now, we have 2 zones. They're proposing 12 zones, 13 zones. The boundary of every one of those is controversial. It's not controversial, but a decision was made to put the line there and not there. So especially with the commercial areas, just take a look at them when you're out and about. Have an understanding, keep this in your car. Have an understanding of where that, the neighborhood business zone would terminate and what's next to it. Should it be expanded? Should it be reduced? Should it be modified? That's the biggest change. We're going to go from effectively 2 zones to multiple zones. So 1.7 is consolidating the watershed lands into a single district. We've always had the open space zoning district, so that's sort of consistent with our approach. We can't do much in those areas anyway. DEP's in charge of it, so that's a logical thing to do. 1.8 gets a little trickier, and this is creating a dedicated open space zone, and that would be like parks and cemeteries, privately owned, quote-unquote, open space. Logical from a planning perspective. What that does, however, is now if you've taken my property, which is in an R3 zone, and you've zoned it open space, and I can no longer develop anything on the property, even though it's a cemetery, I'm going with my certiorari tomorrow, and all of us, I'm grieving my taxes because you've taken away any potential development opportunity I had on my property. So there's a consequential tax implication associated with something that seems like a logical thing to do, but may have a downside. So again, just food for thought. And again, simple paragraph, perhaps they have put a lot of thought into this and it's simply distilled into these simple paragraphs. we need to understand this a lot better. So just in terms of the product we'll give back to the town board, I think it's nothing more than our thoughts on each of these goals. Just as I said before, good idea, but wouldn't this have a potential negative tax implication for the, that's all we have to do, raise our concerns to the town board. And whether the town board says, I'm blowing you off, I don't care, or, I don't know, did Nelson Pope ever think about this? Let's get them in and have a work session and understand that a little better. That's where we are at this point. So I don't think the town board is looking for us to rubber stamp anything. I think they want us to be critical, and if we just raise these concerns, raise these issues, I think that's how we can, again, gain some better understanding of the output of this whole process. 1.9 is incentive zoning. They're not specific, I'm not sure where they're going with this. So incentive zoning, form-based zoning in our commercial districts, I'm all for that. Incentive zoning in our residential areas, where it's governed by traditional zoning, I don't know that I want to incentivize folks. The zoning's the zoning. If the zoning's not right, let's get the zoning right. But if we're in a 3-acre zone and the incentive is, well, you can actually develop it to a 2-acre density or 1-acre density, what are the standards that are applied to that? How is it being equitably applied? If we did it for one guy, how do we apply it to the next guy? So there's a lot of details with respect to that could be problematic or troubling. And again, incentivizing the development we want to see where we want it. In those hamlet areas and the areas immediately surrounding the hamlets, great. But once we start getting back into the hinterlands, it's never been our objective to fully develop every residential lot in the town. Part of what the town's charm is its quote-unquote rural character. So sort of suggesting, yeah, go out in the hinterlands and develop every square foot you can, and here's some incentives to do it. That's not necessarily, I think, the vision that we want to achieve for the town, and that's implied in this incentive. So whether they meant that or not, I'm not quite sure. 1.10 was, these were the two additional mixed use, Mahopac Falls and Secor. Two additional kind of mini hamlets, great idea, let's facilitate that.
There's a little mini hamlet.
I think it's great.
Currently, it seems like it.
It is, and again, define it better. Right now, the zoning doesn't correspond to that, so I love both of those.
Yeah.
Make it better, make it clearer. 1.12 was incorporating green infrastructure. So this is something that I think is very easy for us to do. A lot of communities have done this in their codes. Now there are requirements for various green infrastructure improvements and so forth. This is a cut and paste from the best examples of codes elsewhere and simply including it. So right now we have site plan standards. When you submit to us, we have a checklist with respect to, do you have a north arrow on the drawing? Do you do this? Have you done that? Do you have a grading plan? Do you have a stormwater management plan? We will then have, do you have an energy green infrastructure plan, a sustainability plan?
I mean, it's nice, we discussed EV tonight with the EV charging stations. With,
Yeah, great example. So that, again, great example, and to Joe's point, Joe plugs his car in every night. In 10 years, they're not building cars that have internal combustion engines. They're all going, I mean, Ford is committed, these major companies committed to it. We're done, this is what we'll be doing. So right now, that scares me, because if I travel more than 400 miles a day periodically.
Or you're back in Florida right now.
Yeah, exactly right. Right? So, but that's foresight, that's planning. We should be more in tune with how to deal with that. Is it a requirement in the code, or are we just doing it out of Craig's effort to push them tonight? It probably is something we'd want to codify.
Yeah.
So another great point.
I mean, we asked tonight as compared to being able to say, look, you must.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Hey, Pat, real quick question. What's passive building certification?
So like, there are lots of, like LEED, you've heard of LEED?
Yeah,
So lots of, there's different green building certification agencies.
okay.
And we can pick one and say, you've got to comply with that. What I would rather do, so that, to do that, they have to now spend money, go through that process, and it's a pain in the neck. You've heard people say that to you, it's a pain in the neck, I don't want to do it. If we embed it in our code and simply say your windows have to be a certain R value, whatever it might be, You don't have to go to the Green Building Council and spend $10,000 to get a plaque on your front door to meet a requirement. It's built into our zoning code. And most of it is typical building code kind of things, modern building code. It's not extraordinary. Some communities have pushed it, but I don't think we need to push it, but we would be remiss if we went through this whole process and our code didn't make any reference
Yeah.
to achieving higher levels of green building and sustainability. So I think that's a really easy thing to do.
So right above the,
Yeah, me too.
passive building is the leadership in energy
Yep.
and environmental design. So,
Yep.
I mean, if I'm hearing you right, that's something we probably want to take out of the.
Yeah, so to get LEED certification, you have to have an approved plan. So how does that count for you if they can't do it until they're done with you? You know what I mean? So you take some of the stuff that LEED requires and you put it in our code. So just achieve that.
And don't require this.
And don't require it. If they want to go and do it just to get the plaque on the building, so be it. But it's not a requirement any longer. And again, that's just the foresight of process, making sure the process flows efficiently and effectively, and we're not throwing additional impediments in the wake of guys who are being pioneers, trying to be the champion, coming to our community. Don't make it harder for them, make it easier for them. And at some point in time, by the way, we're benefiting from the observations of what's gone on around us for the past couple of years. Many of the communities are starting to hit the brakes because so much repurposing, so much redevelopment has been going on. They're sort of need to take stock and sort of say, wait a minute, did we overdo it? Because so much new development has been occurring. I've got to tell you, the market demand for mixed use and multifamily housing is, even with what you've seen in New Rochelle and Yonkers and White Plains and Portchester and all those communities where thousands of units are being built, the market demand is still not even close to being met. And what we saw post-pandemic, which I think is a lingering effect, is I don't need to be near Manhattan. I don't need to live in Yonkers because I commute to Manhattan. I'm only going to Manhattan once a week or twice a month. So I can live in Carmel. I can live in, Putt Valley or something like that, as long as I'm relatively close to the train. It's a long commute once in a while is not such a bad thing. So I'd rather have the quality of life of a little more rural sort of area. So the demand is still going to be there, and it's still going to be extending into our area, even though the pandemic thing was a bit of a fluke when people ran out of the city. People are now realizing they don't have to go back every day. So the demand is there, I can tell you that.
Pat, we've mentioned EV charging stations a few times tonight. Is there anything we should be thinking about in this plan about the electrical infrastructure that gets us there? Because right now it's
Bingo.
efficient.
So that's another thing, just like sewer and water. So what has happened all over the place are community solar facilities. These are private companies that build solar farms, and they sell the electricity back to the grid. It's not serving the site that these solar farms are on, but they're very large, and I'm sure you've seen them around. The problem is, and these are private companies, and they're assisted and subsidized by NYSERDA. So they're getting lots and lots of incentives to do these things. So they're trying to do them everywhere. The problem is, the utility lines can only handle so much voltage or wattage, or I'm not sure how you describe it. So you could build a giant solar farm, all the electricity can't get into the pipe, can't get into the electrical system to go anywhere. So they're wasting the energy. It's all, and I've seen these maps from Con Ed and so forth, and it's these colored maps that show here's a green line that has capacity, here's a red line where there's no capacity. So some solar company that has just an incentive to build the solar farm and get the heck out is building them next to the red lines, and they can't bring it into the grid. They're self-interested, they're not looking at the broader benefits. So your point is absolutely well taken. If the infrastructure does not exist to accommodate this, both going in and out, charging the power stations or these solar facilities, you can't do it.
But I guess you brought up a point. If you're close to one of these red lines and a solar company wants to come and build a solar farm right next to that red line, should the zoning code permit that?
No, that's the point. It
Yeah,
should not
yeah,
permit that.
okay.
Or go turn the red line into a green line.
Yeah,
Go
exactly.
work with, the power companies. So it's a really interesting dilemma. It's the same thing. And again, we get bamboozled by these, the solar companies, I give them a lot of credit. These community solar companies, because people can buy into it, you get a rebate on your energy bill all the time, it's a great thing. They're the ones making out, and they don't, and what we're seeing is, they're tearing down 20 acres of forest to put in solar fields. Drive past them, it's not an attractive thing to see.
It's kind of contradictory, too.
And it absolutely is. So the issue that's happening now is, what's better?
Yeah.
Like the carbon sequestration of a forest, or the benefit of a solar facility that reduces carbon emissions from vehicles and so forth. So it's really kind of what's better, and I've actually gone down that rabbit hole, and we've, in another community, hired experts to look at that. It turns out the solar facilities are long-term beneficial in a certain way, and the numbers shake out that they're doing a good job. Trees sequester carbon, but the whole solar process at the end of the day is probably net better.
I'd still rather see it in a big shopping center.
So what we should do to get right on top of that, the simple answer is, we like them in parking lots, we like them on rooftops, we don't want to see them in the undisturbed wooded areas. That's a simple thing to add to the code.
Shopping centers, right on top of the big shopping
Right?
centers.
Right? You know
Yeah.
what bugged me is going through Vermont in the past few years. It used to be you drive through the farms in Vermont. They had a similar program. Now you drive through Vermont, it's solar farms all over the place. It's like, it used to be nice, now it like, and the last one on this section was, clean up the zoning code. So 100% our zoning code absolutely needs to be cleaned up from top to bottom, inconsistencies and so forth. So that was goal number one, Mr. Chairman, with a lot of preamble rambling. So,
Let's try to do another one. Goal number 2 is, I don't want
Okay.
to keep everybody too late, but goal number 2 is a little shorter, and we got to get.
so
let's try
economic
to go.
development is goal number 2. So provide diverse economic development opportunities. Yep, we're with you on that. So, number 1, diversify the types of non-residential uses in town. We've been screaming about that for years. 100% agree with that. It's the right thing to do. But again, the notion of, can we support additional residential growth, 1 acre zone as opposed to 3 acre zone, with the sewer and water capacity we have? That's sort of the question that relates to more residential uses in town. Non-residential uses, so this is, I'm sorry, this was the non-residential use. So yeah, as I talked about before, expand that. They're talking about farm-to-table restaurants, delis, coffee shops, health food stores, breweries, distilleries. I added a whole bunch to that list. Add them, make it invitational, and I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I'm just agreeing with you.
Yep. 2.2 is a business improvement district. So business improvement districts are a tool where all the businesses effectively pitch in. It's like a self-tax, and that money is used to do things in the business district. So if you go to New Rochelle, you see the guys that wearing red jumpsuits, it says New Rochelle Bid on their back, and they clean the streets. They're like the old-timey guys with the wheel shopping carts or garbage
all over
cans.
Manhattan,
They're
yeah.
sweeping up the sidewalk
Downtown
and keeping the
parks.
area clean. That's what they're using their business improvement, some of their business improvement district money for. Some communities, it goes into separate funds, and they buy public parking lots, they improve their infrastructure, new streetlights, new curbs, and so forth. It's a self-tax on the business people. My experience with these have been, the business people will buy into this if they see what the money's being spent on is beneficial to them.
Makes
If
sense.
it's, we're gonna take the money and we're gonna put it in and trust us, we'll do something good with the money, nobody's gonna wanna join the bid. If there's a plan for the bid, and we're gonna buy 12 new streetlights, this is what they look like, they're cool, people participate in the process. Once they're in the process and they realize it doesn't hurt so much, then it's a renewing and continual kind of an operation. So bid, I think, is a great tool. It doesn't do anything from our approval process, it doesn't delay things. It's a separate, independent entity to revitalize those commercial districts. All good, as far as I'm concerned. Number 2, no, that was the number 2. 3 was protect the integrity of commercial zoning from residential uses. This one surprised me a little bit. So we've seen it the other way around. I don't know that we've seen too much commercial use or residential use encroaching into the commercial zones other than the apartments above that we've wanted to see. I think they're referring to single-family homes in commercial areas. We've not seen that. That's not a threat that we've been worrying about. So I'm not sure why they're focusing on single-family zones into those commercial areas. More importantly, they've now distinguished the commercial areas into so many different distinct areas. I don't see that as a concern necessarily, but again, I'd like to send that back to the town board and say, what's up with this? What are we missing? 2.4, committed to supporting a group that will pursue economic development opportunities. So that's a good idea. Sometimes the chambers of commerce do that.
I was going to ask you about the chamber.
Yeah, and whomever that entity is, there should absolutely be a group that's focused on our economic activity, and they should be out there shaking every tree, banging every bush, trying to sell our community. We should have presentation materials. We should be engaging the public relation firms to help us sell what's great about this community. So I'm all for that.
Do we still have a tourism department?
I don't,
We had a tourism.
so the county does, yeah. I don't think, we don't locally, I don't think.
The town of Carmel used to.
Yeah, we did, they do have one.
They still?
Yes, I was
So-
on the original board, and they then got a new chairman in, so
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
there is. I don't know how active it is,
Yeah,
but
I
I
don't,
know
I
that
don't
there's.
know that it's been particularly active, but that's
Yeah.
the kind of vehicle.
Yeah.
Back to what you said about the lake.
And again,
Tourism.
those kinds of groups, Vicky, operated without guidance.
Yeah.
So the guidance comes from a comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
So now you are empowering them to achieve their mission by something that they can stand behind and say, this is what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah,
You know, so I think that's a great idea as
yeah,
well.
and I always thought that board could have done a lot more than it did, and it just never got off the ground. Their biggest thing was Tilly Foster, and that was it.
Yeah. 2.5, again, we're getting kind of in the weeds in this, but they're suggesting an economic development floating zone. This was similar to the conversation we had earlier about the planned unit development in the shopping centers. A floating zone requires an applicant to petition us to say, create the floating zone in a particular area. It's hard. You're making it hard to accommodate that. If we, plus the other side of that is by saying there's a floating zone, and if you think it's a good idea, John, you can come to us and say, please put it over here. We're making, first of all, you're going through that effort and energy and cost and so forth. Second is we're relinquishing our vision to you. We should be the ones saying, no, we want the economic development here. This is, and it's not a floating zone, it's a fixed zone. This is our economic incentive zone. Come here. So you see that in certain communities, there are incentives, economic incentive zones, economic development zones. The state has programs, economic empowerment zones. You've heard those. It's a targeted area. This is where you want to be. So again, I think this is just the right concept, but shifting the burden to John instead of us.
Yeah, it's a little troubling the way it's written.
Right? And again, maybe they have a better understanding of how this would be applied. It just doesn't come across in these two paragraphs, so I'm not sure what they're getting at.
It kind of reads like a potential loophole.
Yeah, exactly right.
And I understand we should be flexible in certain developments, but that's a discussion among planning, zoning, and the town board. But to have something there that somebody from a board could say, oh, we're gonna do this.
Well, so just if you think of it, what was Union Place? It was an economic development floating zone. They proposed some of their brand-new zoning, they made it up, and they said, do it, and we're gonna do all this commercial activity over there. Didn't go over very well. You know, they had lots of opposition, there was a lot of concern, because you're letting this guy do it, why is it? It's the same thing, it resonates with that concern about equity. You're giving John this economic development zone, what about me? I want my executive. So you avoid that by simply saying, this is where the town's economic development zone is, instead of this notion of an applicant petitioning for it.
Would also seem, your solution would also seem to avoid the potential for abuse.
Exactly right. You know, yeah, to that point. Of
Payoffs,
course, it
things
could be
like that.
used,
Yeah.
right. This is my buddy, we're gonna let him in, because
Yeah.
he's a good guy, and he contributed to my campaign, so let's give him an economic development zone. 2.5 is
2.6, right?
2.6, pursue uses that capture the demand created by visitors. So that's Anthony, that's your point. If it's the lakes, that's what we want to focus on. The folks attracted because of the lakes are the people that we want to capture, and give them a restaurant, give them a pizzeria, give them an ice cream shop, give them a liquor store, whatever it is, a boutique brewery, and let them stay in a boutique hotel at night because they went to the liquor store, or whatever it is. So that's, I love that idea, great idea.
So the question I had is, the focus here is on doing it by a special use permit. So I'm looking at the part of what is called, what is this? This is HMC, Hamlet Mixed
Yeah,
Use
that's,
Center.
yep.
So are we talking about going outside of that Hamlet Mixed Use Center into the, what is this called? Neighborhood, excuse me, NR, what's NR?
So this one.
Neighborhood residential
Yep.
zone.
So
is
this-
starting to allow these
In the-
tourist-related
So
uses.
2.6 is interesting, because they point out some of the sites that are tourist venues for our community, and they're not in the hamlets, they're in the hinterlands in many instances. So if, someone going to the Fred Dill Wildlife Sanctuary, that's off in the woods, so do you then put a boutique hotel and so forth around that facility? Probably not. That's the challenge of this particular
But
provision.
I'm focused on the lake. Are we talking about this encroaching into the neighborhood residential?
Yeah, I
zone?
don't think that's what this is saying, is those other areas that are residential areas provide these incentives out there. I don't think we necessarily want to do that. Number one, you're taking away the opportunity for that use, that business to be in the hamlets where we really want them to be, and you're putting them out in the hinterlands where we kind of don't want them to be. So I think but that's where the tourist facilities are. So you've seen this in lots of touristy areas.
I'm still focused, though, on the lake
Yep.
community.
Yep.
We have a very fine distinction between the commercial area,
Yep.
mixed use, and the residential area.
Yeah.
And this says, these can be allowed by special use permit and subject to planning board review, and they would be required to meet certain locational and performance criteria. What that says to me is that, based on some vague prescription that's not really spelled out here, you would be allowed to
That's what they're
sprawl
saying.
into the
Yeah,
residential.
that's what this is saying.
And that's a concern that I have.
I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
The bigger concern may be who handles the special use permit. I mean, I haven't dug too deep, but there are aspects of this code that a special use permit is handled by the town board, and this board would have no say. So
Didn't I
keep
see
that in
some-
mind when you're looking at the code.
Didn't I see something that said special use permits would be handled by the planning board?
So it can be not to be determined.
Okay.
So that.
When you start to get into the nuts and bolts of the code itself, be mindful of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It could be any of those boards. So the point is linking tourism with varied sites that exist not only around the lake, but elsewhere in the
I
town,
get that.
and saying they need to be supported by commercial activity. How do you do that? So again, just think of the examples you've seen in your life where you go to some outlying area and you come back to town to have dinner after you hike through the trails or whatever it is. If you go to Gettysburg, there's a McDonald's on the other side of Pickett's Charge kind of thing. So they've put it together a little too closely in that instance. So I think we want to maintain the separation appropriately. 2.7, increase opportunities for art, research and technology. So huge expansion of these facilities, down county, Regeneron's building every 3 weeks. There's another 500,000 square feet they're building. There's 3 million square feet being built around the Westchester County
This
hospital.
brings it back to infrastructure, though. you know, so that
100%.
They use a
So
lot of water.
that's so
and-
aspirational.
Yeah.
Why would Regeneron come up here? So there's 2 reasons they'd come up here. Number one, there's infrastructure, cheap land, there's a site that's suitable. But the biggest issue that all of those companies are dealing with is housing. So they can't house their folks down county. Their buildings, all this, tons and tons of space, tons and tons of well-paid executives and scientists working in these facilities, and there's no place for them to live. That's why all that development's going on down there. If we create the additional opportunity for some of that residential development in the shopping centers, for example, now, my people could live here because there's housing nearby that they could live at. So maybe if there was an appropriate location that had the infrastructure, maybe so. This is really aspirational. It's a great aspiration, but all of those pieces have to come together. And again, just by saying, please come to our community, we've been saying, please come to our community for industrial uses forever, and nobody's ever shown up. So again, good idea. I don't know how practical it is at the end of the day. 2.8, this is an interesting one too. So work with property owners to create shovel-ready sites to expedite the planning process. Tricky. So presumably that's a generic shovel-ready box on particular properties. You know how difficult it is to assess and evaluate that. So the notion of being shovel-ready expedites the process. I kind of like that idea, but generic shovel-ready, like this area, you have some ability to generically say it's okay to do stuff there and just get building permits for it, or however it might work. We don't have the luxury of being generic with the evaluations we do. We saw it tonight. We get into the weeds of these things. There's sewer and water, there's parking issues. Everything is really specific to the applications we see. So I would need a lot more understanding of what they mean to produce those. The notion of shovel-ready is great, but how we get there, it's tricky. I'll just leave it at tricky. That's probably the best word to use.
It's gonna start the Wild West.
You know, it is, and again, there's a fine line between expediting and giving away the store, and we do not want to give away the store. We need to maintain control over what we're doing in our community appropriately. And again, I think there are some vehicles to do that through code changes and modifications, but just creating generic shovel-ready is a little tricky. Encourage local food economy. So this is when they get into these next several requirements of the agricultural use of the town. Promote sustainable agriculture, permit indoor agricultural production. Sketchy, not sketchy, so aspirational, we're not Iowa. Indoor agricultural production is always very tricky. Those are greenhouses, basically. It's not an agricultural use if you put a 300,000 square foot building on a property. That's an impervious surface. It's a factory building, essentially, with agricultural stuff going on inside. So there's a real contradiction in some of those facilities. The notion of having picturesque orchards in certain areas, that's wonderful.
But this is pretty broad, because we would allow farm-to-table restaurants, we do have
We
farmers
do.
markets, we would allow tasting and tap rooms, so this
But
is a
there's,
whole.
but they're qualifying it. It says should be permitted as accessory to farm operations. That to me is a limiting factor. I'd want all this stuff, whether or not it's.
So you
Right,
need,
that's
what that's
my
saying
point.
is, we need an Iowa farm, and if you have that, then you can have some of
Yeah,
these
and
accessory
I'm
things.
saying we would like it without the farm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So what I think is more suitable for us is sort of these, for lack of a better word, kind of gentlemen's farms or hobby farms. We're not Iowa, we're never gonna be Iowa, but people move here because there's open space and they'd like to have some agriculture, sell their stuff in a farm stand in front of their house, or bring it down to the farmer's market on Saturdays, or whatever it might be. That's great, but we're not gonna see 60 acres of the back 40 planted in soybeans in this community. And they're
Or
sort of,
hops for beer.
yeah, and
But
they're sort
we're
of
right to
alluding to.
promote like a farm-to-table restaurant,
Love it, I think that's great.
Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely
provide
right.
its own,
And in instances where those have existed, they've been very, very successful, and they've spun off additional uses that are ancillary and affiliated with those. So it's a great idea. But that's the scale I think we're talking about, not, and forgive me, Iowa, but we're not looking at large-scale agricultural operation in the community. That existed 150 years ago. We're not going back to that, unfortunately. And remember, no one's gonna look at this real estate today like someone looked at it 150 years ago. It's no longer farmland. Can I feed my family off my 40 acres? It's real estate. So no one's gonna devote that valuable real estate to an agricultural use that is probably marginally successful at best, who knows, but it's real estate, so they're gonna wanna see how many lots can I get on my 3-acre parcels as opposed to a bunch of soybeans. No offense to soybeans. So that's 9, 10, and 11. Again, all
Yeah,
those agricultural.
I've got one comment on 10.
Yep.
Explicitly allow farm stands within any zoning district. I mean, there are farm stands and there are farm stands. It's a question
So
of dimension.
I like the idea of farm stands, subject to our understanding of what a farm stand is.
Yeah,
So the quaint little local farm stand,
sounds great.
great, absolutely right. When it's, you know, DeChico's West kind of thing, that's not what we're talking about, and you've seen elaborate farm stands, so.
Yeah.
And those become parking issues, people are all over the street, they're running across the street with their tomatoes in their arms, and it's a nightmare.
And we're talking about a lot of agricultural production throughout all of these things.
Yeah.
Where does cannabis sit in all this?
In terms of what?
It's an agriculture.
Oh,
Are we
cannabis.
gonna end-
So, yeah.
Are we gonna end up with pot farms here?
So, it's my understanding they're heavily regulated. They are, where they are allowed to be is governed by the state. But I think that's evolving and changing as well. So the answer is yeah, probably. So instead of, 16-year-olds growing it in their backyard, that's a legitimate agricultural use, like tobacco or anything else. Just because it's a regulated substance doesn't mean it's not an agricultural product. So it's an interesting conversation. It's evolving.
It's all indoor, too. I mean, New Jersey's doing it left and right.
Most of it is. Yeah.
A lot of intense lighting and.
Yep. That went through 2, 12, community farms,
You don't even
and
need.
213,
They do it in old warehouses.
smaller scale agricultural activities. And again, that's the niche I think I see us more benefiting from.
What number you
Backyard
on now?
farms,
Pat, what number?
12,
13.
213. So this is where they're saying backyard farms, small animal husbandry, apiaries, community farms, gardens, that kind of thing. So, great, I think that's wonderful. That would sort of fit, but that's a small piece. And if you look at some of the other goals, 2 or 3 policies associated with the goal, we have 5 policies associated with agriculture. That seemed to me an overemphasis of something that is a small piece of what we would probably want to achieve or could achieve in our community. So,
Didn't we just, I mean, recently, within the last couple of years, move away from people having chickens in their backyards?
we did,
That's what I
heavily,
thought.
very controversial.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the number of chickens, yeah. Mike deals with it all the time. It's a problematic issue. But
Yeah,
again,
so now we're gonna be putting it in there saying, all right, well, let's go back to chickens.
Chickens have come home
Yeah.
to roost.
so,
Sometimes we get a little ahead of ourselves, a little ridiculous, too.
but that's the other thing that I think you need to continually look at this through is the lens of reality. What should be really focusing on, what's realistic. I keep using the phrase, we should be aspirational in the plan, that's a good thing, but we also need to be realistic at the same time. And again, the involvement of the building department, the involvement of the engineering department, the involvement of our real-world experience with some of these recommendations will ground them in what we're really dealing with on a daily basis, candidly. So, again, the kind of comments we can give back to the town board, I think will be useful and helpful. So
I think this is a good spot to,
me too.
I think we'll start on housing. We introduced this tonight, I think we moved along pretty well.
I think so too.
Facilitating this back.
And I apologize that I kind of rambled at the beginning.
No, I think it was a,
It's necessary.
yeah, I'm with Vicky.
It's good,
That's-
Pat.
that's
Thank you
necessary.
for taking us through that.
You can go around about way
That's a good point.
I got to do this.
So thanks for your patience, everybody, I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Minutes first.
Oh, we have minutes first.
Oh,
I read the minutes. I had no comments, and I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second?
All in favor? Aye. Good night, everybody. Thank you.